Good morning. My name is LaShanta Rice. I am one of two regional coordinating co-directors for GMaP Region 1 South. Thank you for attending our spring webinar. The focus of our webinar today is on the Career Development Award. The title of our webinar is Road to the Career Development Award, What You Need to Know. And our presenter today is Dr. Tisha Felder, and our discussant will be Dr. Whitney Robinson. And I'll just briefly introduce each one of them, and then Dr. Felder will get started, and Dr. Robinson will chime in throughout the presentation, piggyback on some of the things that Dr. Felder will speak about. So Dr. Felder received her bachelor's in sociology from Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and a master's of social work from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. She had a specialization in social policy and evaluation and community and social systems. She received that in 2002. In 2010, she graduated with her doctorate in behavioral sciences with a minor in epidemiology and health policy from the University of Texas School of Public Health in Houston. Dr. Felder completed her postdoc training at the University of South Carolina, and she was jointly affiliated with the Department of Clinical Pharmacy and Outcome Sciences in the School of Pharmacy and the Cancer Prevention and Control Program for the Arnold School of Public Health. Dr. Felder has presented at local and national meetings, including here at the Medical University of South Carolina, in the Hollings Cancer Center, and other annual retreats, as well as the American Public Health Association and American Association for Cancer Research. Dr. Felder's long-term goal is to identify approaches that address racial and ethnic and socioeconomic disparities in health, with an emphasis on disadvantaged populations diagnosed with cancer. She has strong research interests in mentoring and training of junior faculty from underrepresented backgrounds and biomedical science. Dr. Whitney Robinson is an epidemiologist who specializes in quantitative methodology for studying health inequalities. Dr. Robinson is an assistant professor in epidemiology at the University of North Carolina Gilling School of Global Public Health. She serves as a fellow in the Carolina Population Center, and she's a member of the UNC Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center. Dr. Robinson's research is showing how social and environmental factors underpin race and sex differences in health, even for inequalities sometimes presumed to be mostly biologically based, such as racial differences in cancer incidence or rates of hysterectomy. Today, Dr. Felder will talk about what she learned about with regards to her Career Development Award. Specifically, she'll focus on the K01 Award. Dr. Felder will discuss what the K Award is and why you do or do not need it, what you should do before you apply, and what you need to remember as you apply. As you think about developing your K Award, it's important to remember a quote by John Januzzi: "You will learn more from your mistakes than from your achievements." So what is a K Award? The K Career Development Award was actually created to develop the scientific workforce and foster independence. In their evaluation, the NIH reports that K awardees are significantly more likely to have subsequent research publications when they're compared to unfunded applicants. And collectively, researchers who have had a prior K01, K08, or K23 had a significantly higher R01 award success rate than the pool of individuals with no prior career development support. So as you think about what a K Award is, Dr. Felder will talk more about her
evidence-based cancer care among vulnerable populations. So I just use this as an example of just something that you might want to think through yourself to identify where you need additional training and if that training is necessary for you to achieve independence. Because again, for all of us that may not be the case, and particularly for those of you who have postdocs, you really need to make sure that you think this through thoroughly, because someone can perceive, well, you've already done a postdoc. Why do you need even further training? So this is just, to me, I think, an initial step at evaluating yourself before you embark on this mechanism. Yes. So here is a having necessarily done all of these things. But I think you should first know your institution. All institutions are not as enthusiastic about K awards as others. Some, it's not a big deal at all. For me, I was the first person in my college to ever receive a K award. And while my institution was open to it, I was kind of the guinea pig in the process. And so I think there were a couple of things that I should have inquired about prior to or in that application process, so that I would have kind of expected some things on the back end once I got funded. So here's just a couple of questions, and depending on how your units are set up, we have a very small unit in the College of Nursing, and so we report directly to our dean many times. We also have an associate dean for research. But here's some questions that I think you ought to think about. So again, are you going to be the first one who's ever, received a K? Has anybody else done it before? Are you going to have support in the application process as well as once it's funded? That's very important. There's no way I could have submitted my case without the pre-award support and now managing it with the post-award support. Will the terms of your appointment change if you get a K? That was something that I did not anticipate in my process, but again, these are very unit-specific, but within my unit, a full-time appointment was determined to be an 11-month appointment, although I was initially hired as a 9-month appointment. And so for those of you who enjoy the 9-month appointments, you know that you generally get your summers off. And but once I received my pay, that appointment had to change. So, but then I have colleagues in other colleges who are in social work and medicine where their appointments remain what they were previously. So again, your unit has the opportunity to make those changes to your appointment, and that might be something you want to talk about. What exactly does that remaining 25% look like? Another area where, trying to think about any teaching or clinical responsibilities, you want to kind of get that spelled out from the right person within your institution so you kind of know what you're going to be balancing once you get funded. And then can you achieve promotion and tenure with the K? I've heard a number of people talk about how within their units they don't consider the K as a research grant. And so while they might achieve the K, they're still expected to have some other R grant, R21, R03, R1 prior to meeting their tenure promotion guidelines. And so I think that's really important that you find out what that is for you, those of you that are on the tenure track. And then for those of you who are on the non-tenure track, can you use the K as leverage to transition to a tenure track position if you get it? I was hired in a unique way where that's exactly what happened for me. So once I achieved that external funding, I transitioned from a non-tenure appointment directly to a tenure track appointment. So those are things that you should, again, think about as you're going into this process. Get lots of feedback. I shared my presentation and my thoughts with people for probably about a year and a half, which is a very long time, but I started early. Again, I had a mentor in my postdoc who wanted me to begin thinking about my K as soon as I kind of finished my postdoc project. Make sure in and of itself that it's a good idea, and for this presentation, I'm assuming that you have a good idea, because that's where all of this starts. I presented as part of my faculty job talk to let future employers know kind of what I was thinking about doing. It made for great conversation between myself and other faculty, as well as the dean. Present your idea in existing forums at your institution, different training opportunities, or just assemble your own group of colleagues. But you definitely want to get some feedback on that initial idea. Send your ideas to the appropriate program officer, and so because we're talking about NCI, there are specific program officers that you would contact for that. But across, if there are any people on the call who are outside of NCI, again, most of those program officers' names and emails and phone numbers are listed within the program announcements. But I connected with the program officer at NCI. I sent him a bio sketch and one-pagers of my research mentoring and training plans to get that initial feedback. And the feedback that I received was really helpful, and I don't think that one thing I've note, and I'll talk about this a little later, but one piece of advice that I was given was that I was reminded that the idea is for you to move from the K to the RO1. And so I was encouraged to make sure that I was submitting my RO1 at least within that 4th year to give myself time for resubmission. You were going to go from 75% funding to likely that funding is going to drop dramatically after you get off of the K. So you want to give yourself time to make those adjustments, but also you want to ensure that you absolutely move from the K to the RO1. And lastly, just a 10K focused training, such as this one and others. I know that Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, their New Connections program, had offered a K award training the year that I was applying. I attended that. Recently, there's the Health Equity Leadership Institute that's based out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. They include a K-MOC review as part of their training. So there are a number of different opportunities for training that focus specifically on the K. So identify potential mentors, and I put potential in parentheses because I feel like you have to treat looking for mentors kind of like dating. So you don't know who you're necessarily going to go with, who you're not, but you kind of want to test the water with a broad number of people. I think generally your mentor should meet some kind of content or methodological expertise. They should help you get access to data or population of interest or career development. One of my mentors, is actually her exclusive role is to help me with career development, and she's really poised to do that because she worked for the American Cancer Society for over 10 years and helped develop their behavioral research program. So she has a lot of experience with these types of mechanisms, but also with working with young investigators like myself. So this is just a general rule of thumb. This is not written anywhere. This is just advice that I've just heard, and I'm sure some of you have heard this as well, but that your primary mentor must be currently funded by an RO1 or an equivalent. And this makes sense from the standpoint of we have to be working with people who are going to help us get from the K to the R, to RO1, or those equivalents. So just make sure that at least your primary mentor is well funded. And even if they don't have exactly the expertise you have, they should share, again, one of those areas where you might need some additional mentoring, and then you can have other co-mentors to fit some of the other things that they may not be addressing. You can look within your institution, also without, outside of your institution, NIH project reporter, looking in your own area, who's publishing the work that you're citing. Look for some of those people and potential mentors. With the level of technology that we have now, there's lots of opportunity to work with people who are outside of your university. And generally speaking, your reviewers are okay with it as long as you're very explicit about how that's going to work. And if you haven't already, this is just another rule of thumb. You should collaborate on a scientific product or of some sort prior to your case submission. And I would say mainly with your primary mentor, but if you've got some relationships with your other mentors, just make sure that information, make sure that you pursue those opportunities so that you can establish that you do have some type of working relationship with them before your application.
I believe Dr. Robinson had a comment.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Robinson, are you there?
Hello. I did not have a comment, but I think I was nodding along and I might have smiled to something you said.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so just to continue with this, identifying your mentors, again, get some feedback on those initial ideas from potential mentors. And you, again, use this as an opportunity to evaluate how they work, how they respond to you. Did they even respond to you or not? Do you like working with them after having some engagement with them? I think the content and the methodological expertise has to be there, but on some level, you also have to have mentors working with you that you actually enjoy working with, because this is a very long time, it's a 5-year award. So these are people you're going to be committed to for a very long period of time, very similar to almost a dissertation. And meeting with them more frequently than you probably met with your dissertation committee members. So I would also say find out their expectations for you. Everybody has a different style. Again, a mistake I made in the process where I didn't really evaluate each of my stated mentors' expectations and ended up having to have a heart-to-heart with the mentor because I misunderstood her expectations versus another mentor's expectations, which made me realize I never really explicitly had the conversation with her. So I think if you can do that up front, then you will, she's a wonderful person, so there was no bad blood. But sometimes with some mentors and some of our colleagues, they may not interpret your mistakes as, as just such. Some will get offended and it may cause a rift in your relationship. So try to do this in advance if possible. And obviously assemble a team that collectively provides you with the expertise that you need. And as a plug, get involved with GMaP, which is the GMaP Region 1 South who is providing the platform for this webinar. But generally, overall, the GMaP program is committed to linking up investigators with other investigators across regions. And so, especially if you're looking for a mentor at a particular institution, you might be able to link up with them through GMaP. So I just put the link there as well if you'd like to find out more information. And just before I open it up to hear from Dr. Robinson, I just say, just generally for your research needs, again, you have to have a great idea, and you want to start with drafting your specific aims, and that's what you're going to be circulating to all of these people to get feedback on. And find out, are they feasible? I think one of the things that we hear the most from people is that, young investigators always are overly ambitious, and I myself was one of them. I never asked myself, could I actually complete my aim for $30,000 a year? And I was presenting my initial idea, which was to do this large population-based survey, and one of my colleagues so eloquently informed me that there's no way you're going to be able to do that with $30,000. And I had presented the idea in one or two other forums, and nobody ever mentioned that. And so it took me back to the drawing board. So sometimes what you think you can do, you actually cannot do, and you need, again, to present it to different people to find that, to figure that out. And then can they be completed roughly in 3 years? Again, going back to needing to put in that timeline, time to submit and resubmit an R01 application, you need to be able to have some preliminary data not in 3 years. And, and I think you give yourself a little wiggle room in there because everything's not going to go according to plan. I'm in the midst of my first year, and I can already tell you that some things have definitely not gone according to plan, especially in terms of data collection, especially if you're doing primary data collection. So you want to kind of give yourself 3 years, but you're buffering in there that things are not going to be perfect, but you'll still be able to get that first application in by year 4. And then identify potential data sources. Are you going to do your own data collection and use someone else's? I would definitely say if you're using someone else's, I think that looks very strong in applications, and especially if the people who are allowing you to use their data source are mentors. I think also from the standpoint of you're doing primary data collection, if you have a mentor like myself who basically opened the door, helped me get in the door to recruit from a particular population, I think that just looks very strong and demonstrates the commitment of your mentors. And I'm not sure. And then I would just say, will you have the necessary institutional support to carry out your project? Is your institution going to give you a GA, a computer, biostatistical support, whatever? All that stuff needs to be spelled out in your institutional support letter. But first, you need to have that conversation to find that out. Particularly as you're creating, before comments, critiques, or anything you would like to share in addition to what I've stated so far?
Thank you. What I'll probably do is just quickly kind of add comments to the slides. So if we could kind of go back and I'll kind of touch on each slide. That was a really great overview, and you provided so much great information. So I'm not going to reiterate everything, but just focus on areas where my experience may have differed or where I might have a slightly different take. So if we can go to the slide about know your institution. I really love this advice, and I think it's really important to understand where the incentives are in your institution. So, for instance, if you're in a very teaching-heavy place, they might not want you to have that released time. They might not want you to have all that 75% dedicated time because the teaching is so important. You need to understand that, that bias can be that way. At some research-intensive institutions, they might not like that the overhead or pays are lower than R1s, although I think many people do see pays as being really advantageous because it is a steady stream of funding. And so I think that it really is important to understand the incentive structure in your institution and talk to the relevant people. But I think also it's important for your career to think beyond your institution. I think Ks are also very valuable if you might be on the job market or if you might be thinking ahead to wanting to be portable. If you decide my research program could really do a lot better in a different place, I think often a K is a signal that you are somebody with great potential. On the next slide is getting lots of feedback. This is also my experience, and the only other thing I'd say is that I always tell people I don't know that I think sometimes people can think you really have to have a great idea, and I say that sometimes people can overemphasize maybe how important a great idea is, because ultimately they're not trying to fund the most risky, innovative, high-potential idea, and in fact, as Dr. Rice said, an over-ambitious idea can actually be bad for career development award. They want to know that at the end, you will have developed a solid set of skills and tools and preliminary data to launch your career. And so I think people think they have to have this magnificent, high-risk idea. But I think instead, I think the process you described can be more iterative, where you identify people you might want to work with, and you assess what are the resources at your institution, because you might have a great idea at your postdoc, but when you get to your institution, you realize, oh, there's a lot of great potential to do more in kidney cancer, for instance. So in my case, I hadn't been working in breast cancer, but my institution has really deep expertise in breast cancer, and so one of the reasons I decided to work there is because of the opportunity to learn from experts who have a really rich well of expertise. Another thing I'd say is I also definitely set my aims to an NIH program officer, and that was really helpful. So for backstory, I started my faculty position in the fall of 2010. I wanted to apply, put in my K application in fall of 2011, and so targeting that date, I went to my program officer, who was then Dr. Neil Wally and Dr. Ojeso, and I got really strong feedback that there wasn't enough cancer. I really focused on obesity as a risk factor for cancer, but not cancer. And at the time, it was a little devastating. I kind of went back and I changed my aims. I put off my submission 4 cycles to February, built in a lot more work thinking about cancer, and then I was actually funded on that first submission and began funding in fall of 2012. And so I think sometimes your program officer can give you critical feedback, and it can hurt when you put your heart and soul into something, but ultimately that critical feedback, I think, helped me change my, go ahead. Change my grant enough that I think I ended up doing well on my first submission. And so for the next slide about mentors and identifying mentors, I also had a main mentor who was primarily focused on the career development piece, but I think that is a nice model to have people focus on different things and really thinking about the career development as an important thing in its own right. And he was somebody who was very well funded, and I actually worked closely with him. I have some, I hear some talking on the line.
My apologies, Dr. Robinson. If you're on the call, please place your phone on mute. This is being recorded. Please place your phone on mute.
This is epic. I have never anything like this?
I don't know. I apologize.
That's fine. I'll keep going.
Okay.
So I work closely with him, and we had just standing meetings, and that can be a nice way to do it when you're. I had identified one person, kind of an anchor mentor, and I would meet with him regularly to go over my aims, and sometimes I would arrive. It was difficult because, you know, we worked on refining it for a long time. I got it left. And then I actually had a question for Dr. Rice on the next slide when she talked about finding out expectations, because I think that's such a good point. I think it's a really good point in life. And I can think of all sorts of things around expectations that are important, from their communication style, how frequently you'll meet, how developed people want writing to be. Some people are willing to look at your drafts versus not. And so I was curious, Dr. Rice, if you had any specific examples as far as the questions to ask people to understand their expectations.
That question is actually for Dr. Felder. Dr. Felder?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Dr. Rice, and I'm so sorry.
That's okay. So I don't necessarily feel like I have perfected this, but I think just honestly just being very explicit, you know, and asking people, you know, generally speaking, like when you work on publications, what are your expectations on, you know, at what point do you prefer getting drafts, you know, especially with grants. You know, I know one of my mentors, she's really, really busy, and she's very good at communicating when she's not available, when she will be. She will make exceptions, you know, for me, but she'll let me know, like, my away message is going to tell you that I'm not there, but, you know, you can go ahead and send me this or whatever. But I ask, you know, what does this draft need to look like, you know, when you're ready to comment? I have one mentor who she basically wants a finished product before she sees it. And then I have another mentor who he's very open and actually enjoys kind of that whole process. So even if it looks like bullet points, he'll give me feedback on that. So I think it's just one of those things where we just have to be explicit and honestly just saying, you know, we all know how different we are as colleagues, and we've been trained differently at different institutions. And so given your experience, tell me how you want me to communicate. And I'll give you an example. I have one colleague who shared with me that there was a challenge she had with a mentor and not necessarily responding to the mentor in a timely fashion, the way that the mentor had expected. And so I think that's another thing is kind of asking about their philosophy of feedback. You know, I have one mentor who never tells me what I should do. He's always kind of presenting, you know, A, B, and C, and then I've got it. And then there's other people who feel like when they give you feedback that you're supposed to accept it, you know, as gospel and you know, and accept the changes. So I think a lot of it, I think the more we can have those conversations before mistakes happen, the better. You know, I know you can't anticipate every challenge or every nuance. But I think I tend to be, I don't think in the process I was as vigilant about those things as I could have been. Because I think that's one of the things that I had could have been avoided had I had that expectation conversation.
I'll extend some kindness to you. I think understanding different communication styles is a career-long skill to develop. So I think that's great, and I think it's great that you've offered this advice. The last thing I wanted to talk about was on the next slide. And so this, I kind of wanted to push back. I understand what you're saying about the idea of you need to think about when you're going to be submitting your R1. And in my KO1, I actually did say I'm going to start submitting R1s in year 4. I'm currently in year 4, and I have started doing that. But the idea of can your aims be completed in 3 years is potentially scary to me, because if you submit something and the reviewers say this should only take you 3 years, then they might just give you 3 years of funding versus 5 or 4. And so I think it is important to build in when I'm going to start submitting R1s is to say by year 3 I will have enough preliminary data to submission, but I think it is important if you're applying for a 5-year award, for instance, to also have some really robust things planned for years 4 and 5. And it's potential, you know, if you want to have enough done that you can be strong as an independent investigator early enough so that you can go through a few cycles of independent funding. But I have seen people where their study section came back and said, we will fund you but for much less time because they felt like it could be completed more quickly. So that is an interesting tension.
Well, that's good advice, and I don't disagree with you on that. I guess what I mean by completed in 3 years is the end of year 3. You have enough, like you said, the preliminary data to begin the application in year 4. But I agree, it has to be stated in a way that it doesn't come off like you don't need the additional 2 years. But I think it was just, for me, it was just trying to think about going from what I originally proposed to what I ended up proposing for the application that actually got funded. It looked very different, and I think what I had proposed originally, there's no way I would have needed more time to actually do those, to complete those aims. And so I think sometimes we just put too much in each aim to where we're thinking, oh yeah, I can do this in a year and I can do that in a year. And it's like, really, like even what I've proposed now, I mean, I think I'll have some preliminary data maybe by the middle of year 3. No, maybe by the end of year 3. But that's assuming that, again, everything goes according to plan, which has not happened. So it kind of just build in a little wiggle room for recruitment challenges and, you know, all kinds of things that pop up, you know, during this period. But I do agree with you that it is a finagling of kind of how you state it, but because you don't want to make it sound like you don't need the extra time. Great. Okay, well, Dr. Rice, I think we can move forward. And I know I'm trying to fly through these last couple of slides so that we can have Dr. Robinson comment again, but also open it up for questions if anybody has questions. And if you do, please go ahead and you can submit questions along the chat feature if you have any questions right now. But I'm going to just fly through these, and the slides will be available later if you want to read them in more detail. But I think the main thing I just want to state here, so what I did in terms of applying for the application was just kind of highlight the main sections of the grant. And your candidate statement just needs to be really passionate and have some personality. Quite frankly, I felt like I probably would have benefited from having like some journalistic style of writing because, you know, people are reading lots of these grants, and you really want yours to stand out. And I think you have to remember that the K is all about you. It's all about the candidate. 75% of the funds go to your salary, so it's all about you. So you need to make sure that you're promoting yourself and making yourself seem like I'm the ideal person for this grant, for this particular topic. And I will say, I've also heard that in the candidate statement, if there are any gaps in your progress that you can talk about it, so you left academia for a period of time and you had some challenges or you had responsibilities where you kind of got behind on your publication records, I've heard that you need to talk about that because people are going to see it. But know that this is generally recommended only for K applications because I remember someone asking this question at a training, and they're like, you know, you're writing an R1, there's a place for you to kind of talk about that. And no one's going to be giving you kind of any grace at that stage. We can move to the next slide. So your mentors and collaborators, and these again are just general rules. I know that none of this works in a perfect world all the time, but I would say give yourself at least a month to get those letters together, particularly depending on how many you need. I have 5 mentors, and I would definitely say I probably have more than I can anticipate having to manage, but it's working. But I have 5 mentors, and I have about 4 collaborators. I had a lot of letters. So make sure that you give yourself time to get those together. They need to be very explicit about their commitment to you, to your project, and to your development. And now this is, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, Dr. Robinson. Anecdotally, I've heard that monthly meetings seem to be kind of the minimum standard for, when you should be meeting. If you want to meet more than that, that's fine, but it's usually frowned upon if you're meeting with your core mentoring team less than once a month. And I would just say everybody doesn't have to be a mentor. They can be a collaborator. And so your collaborators are people who might be able to help you do something in a time-limited fashion, provide a training opportunity or some special expertise. I had an oncologist who is one of my collaborators, and she provided me the opportunity to do some clinic shadowing, which was amazing, as part of my project and my training. And it was so eye-opening. It was so helpful to me in my current phase of data collection. And so she was a collaborator because she facilitated that experience for me. She's given me some feedback on some other things, but I don't engage with her consistently as I do some of my mentors. Okay, next slide. Research plan, again, general information. Reviewers don't really like dependent aims, and I say that because I had dependent aims. And so the feedback, and based on the feedback and the way that I reframed them, is that my aims were interdependent. And so I had to make the case that while my data collection was really important to achieving aim 1 and to then transitioning to aim 2, I had to have other data sources that could also be used in the event that there was anything that, my data collection didn't go as planned or something, but I had a whole set of other methods of support to be able to move to my second and third aims. So just be careful if you do have dependent aims. Try to make them as interdependent or independent as you can. Because, of course, it makes sense, they're concerned if you don't do aim 1, and then how are you going to do the rest of the study? Use your preliminary data, even if it's just a presentation, if you haven't published it yet. At the time, my publication had not yet been submitted or accepted, but I used the presentation that I did to cite the work that I've done. And again, make reference within your research plan to your mentor letters and your training plan so that they can see the interconnectedness between these, and be especially thoughtful about potential pitfalls and how your mentors are going to help you. Just an example, so for mine, I'm doing primary data collection, but of course there's always recruitment issues and concerns. But I have 2 of my mentors both have existing data sources where I can recruit from their existing patient population if needed. So that was a way to kind of get around it, but also to acknowledge that recruitment is likely to be challenging. Next. So for me, the training plan was the hardest part of the application because you really have to integrate it so well. And once you start writing your proposal, you're going to see how much the training plan morphs from your first draft. I think mine was about the 6th draft is what ended up being submitted. Use lots of tables and figures when you can. My advice, this is just general advice, organize it by year and your career objectives and then the components. And I just say that because now I'm in the progress report phase, and it would just be so nice if I could just go back to my training plan and see what I was supposed to achieve in year 1, not set up with what I actually did. So again, just kind of thinking forward. I think organizing it that way would be advantageous. And then again, I just mentioned earlier, plan on including in that timeline submission for the R01. And I say beginning, but at some point in year 4, you need to give yourself some time. And here is just an example, just kind of cut and pasted a little bit from my application as an example table. This is what I did, but it just kind of gives Give the reviewers a quick and dirty look at who your mentors are, what's their role, how often are you meeting with them, what's their expertise. Let me see what other is about here. Ensuring that your trainings are in sequence with your research. That was feedback that I had received originally. I was proposing to do some qualitative research and had not yet put in the training plan where I didn't have the training for the qualitative research until after that process. And then I put down here just a couple of trainings. And I just say this, and again, I'd love to hear Dr. Robinson's thoughts about this, but consider, some trainings on project management, because that's something that I didn't really anticipate, and I think in our doctoral training, we don't really get a lot of management training, but so much of our ability to become independent scientists is based on our ability to manage, whether it's managing projects, managing students and postdocs, managing budgets. So different types of, I think those kinds of things are important to you being able to be successful with the R01. So I don't know. What do you think about that, Dr. Robinson?
I think it sounds great. I wish I had more of that. And so I do take advantage of things like the Faculty Success Program and opportunities here, but I think that's great in making that professional development, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is just overall advice. Be consistent in your language. Your career goals and objectives should be the same in every section, and I don't mean that necessarily verbatim, but I just mean they need to be saying the same thing. The message needs to be the same. Don't say that you want health communications training and then somewhere later, say you want some other training. It will get confusing. Hire a consultant, ask colleagues to conduct a mock review of your application, which is something I stated earlier. Depending on what resources your institution has, my institution, we have access to hiring consultants for our mock reviews. Our mock reviews are actually required prior to submitting anywhere. So, but look at what your institution has. Make sure that your training in responsible conduct of the research meets all 5 requirements. I say that because mine did not. I didn't pay attention to that in the original application, and those requirements are listed on the website. We're going to give you all the details about everything that needs to be included in your application. So please make sure you do that. And lastly, those of you who are applying for KO1, do not forget your letter of certification. I personally know 2 to 3 different people whose applications have been tossed out because they did not include the letter of certification. And this letter, again, the details are listed, but this letter is an attachment to the application. It does not flag the system when it's not there. So I think there was some grace in the past, but that is no longer the case. So please make sure you do that because you don't want to do all this hard work for your application not to get reviewed. And let's see. And again, budget, just your budget. These are things you're going to talk to the people at your institution about. For me, and I don't know, different institutions do things differently, but my reviewers did not like me having a GA or a computer in my budget. I would say maybe perhaps if I had justified it a little bit more about what their role would be and why that was important to my development as an independent scientist, perhaps it may have made the cut. But I thought if you do include a GA, you could include management training for yourself because again, this is part of us being able to become independent scientists, not just to get some additional labor. And let's see, the more detailed you are, the happier you'll be in the end. And definitely keep in contact with the program officers to help you throughout this entire process of submission, once your application gets reviewed. And then if you end up, needing to resubmit, keep in contact with them along that whole process. So I'll stop there. I would love to hear from Dr. Robinson and if there's anybody with any questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Felder. I'll just hit 3 points, and then we can move to questions. I really love the emphasis that you had on consistency and things being consistent across your application. Before I wrote my K, somebody told me that it was the hardest grant I'd ever write, and I was really glad they told me that, because it's not just a research plan. There's also this training component, and everything needs to be consistent between the training and the research. As you said, the timelines need to make sense, the language needs to make sense, and I think that's something where you have to really check the consistency and that you have the really nice continuity between the parts. That makes it hard. And also, as you alluded to, you're going to need so many letters. And just allowing the time. You're trying to manage the schedules of all these busy people, get these letters. And with the letters, you will also, even if they draft the letters, you will have to go over it to make sure it's consistent. If you say, I'm going to meet with this person bi-monthly, and they say we're going to meet monthly, like, that's not good. So again, like, you have to coordinate it all and make sure everything is consistent. So it is very difficult. It requires a lot of detail and back and forth. And also, if people ask you to write your own letters, like, get help. Because I think when people write their own letters, they tend to be very dry. And I'm always helping people with peer mentoring to kind of beef up their letters. And, you know, like, no, you're the best ever. You're going to change the field and all that kind of language. So if somebody asks you to write your own letters, to really try to get help from somebody you trust to make you sound as great as you are. And then with the candidate statement, I totally agree. People often do have a problem with kind of that self-promotion aspect and telling your story and making that person want to invest in you, making that review panel want to invest in you, because that's the goal even more than the research. The investment in you as a person who can do powerful research in the future, and where this award will set you up for that. And so with my candidate statement, I tried to kind of build a story. I told a narrative. I started with my ultimate career goal, and then I talked about how every step in the way was contributing to that career goal. I kind of had a theme, and I built a narrative. And I think that's important to do, or else you just have a list of, I was doing this, and then I did this, and then I did this. So I think the time to build a narrative is good. And then also I just want to emphasize flexibility. I mean, you're, writing a plan for maybe the next 5 years of your life, and as Dr. Felder alluded to, like, it's not all going to work smoothly. So for instance, around the time that my grant was funded, one of my main mentors actually unexpectedly died, and it was just a really great loss for the university and for my work. And so having that team of people was important then, because the person who took over his research was invested in me, so I was still allowed to use those resources. And I also kind of did change strategies in some ways, and in doing my annual report, I just talked about that, and, it's been fine. I think people get really scared about doing the annual reports, but I think overall, institutions like the CRCHD that fund these awards, they just want you to really set yourself up to be an independent researcher, to do powerful work, and they're there to help you. So to use that as an opportunity, and also to build relationships with other program officers, because when you're putting in those R1s, you might be going to a research program that's with a different program officer. And so that's something I didn't completely understand. But now that I'm getting into kind of different, more R1 grant writing, I'm realizing, I need to build relationships with other program officers as well. And I did put in money for graduate research assistants into mine, so I think you can do that unless, just review panels have changed. But I think justification is always important. Mm-hmm.
So with that, thank you so much, Dr. Robinson. I see one question. Did NCI fund your K Award on the first submission? So I will say that, yes, my first submission did get funded, and it was a unique situation where I was very close to the funding line, but didn't quite make it with the first application. Actually went through the phase of resubmitting so I did my whole resubmission, submitted my resubmission, and ended up withdrawing it early because it was able to get funded in that first round. So it was a very unique situation. him, but again, that's why I say stay in contact with program officers because I was communicating with them the entire time during this process. So for you, Dr. Robinson?
I was also funded on the first submission, although it was delayed a cycle after I got some feedback, and I really kind of did a deep revision. But that one that I actually submitted was funded on the first round.
And let's see. Any other questions?
So the floor is open for questions. This is Dr. Rice with Region 1 South. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat box, and Dr. Felder and Dr. Robinson will answer those. We're coming up on the end of the webinar.
Well, as we're waiting for questions, Dr. Robinson, could you talk a little bit about how you justified your GA in your application?
I'm trying to remember. I should look back. A lot of my project was secondary data analysis. And so it probably had something to do with that, to help with some literature review, other things. But that is a good question. I should look back at it. I didn't get pushed back on that in particular.
Well, I think that's good because I'm remembering, in my budget justification, I think I had, that the GA was going to help with some of the data collection, but not necessarily didn't kind of bet that they would be helping in other ways. And so I think that that's probably why I got more of the pushback was because they thought, the reviewer just made it very clear that, this is a training experience and you should be doing, this and that. And I didn't really go into more detail about other things that GA would be helping me with. Unfortunately, my institution provides me a GA, so I'm able to just get that assistance. But it's time limited assistance. I won't have the fund. I won't have the support after year 2. So it would have been great if I could have managed to justify having a GA.
And another thing I did actually, so, it is a small amount of money. And so there were years when I kind of saved up my money, and they ask you to justify it. If your money is building up, your research fund's too big, you have to justify it. And I was able to say, I have some things planned for year 4 where I want to use a programmer, and it's going to be very expensive, and so I'm intentionally saving up my money towards that. So it's another thing to also think about. You have some flexibility in how you use the money, as long as you can justify it.
That's great. Okay, we have 2 questions. First, can you describe some of the intervention development training opportunities that you included in your training plan? So I primarily included, it is actually intervention mapping. It is a short course based out of the University of Texas Health Science Center, which is where I studied, got my PhD. And one of the expert faculty there, she actually has just recently passed from last year. So she established, she has a book written called Intervention Mapping. And so that training, I think it's a 3 or 5 day course that focuses just on how to develop interventions. And that's the only course that I have in there. One of my mentors, well, 2 of my mentors have successfully obtained R1 for where they have done intervention development. So I also I will be using them as resources to help with training in that area as well. And the last question is, if your current postdoc PI mentor is not R1 funded, how can you strengthen your application? I think that's just where your team, a mentoring team comes in at. Then you may, if you really feel like you want your postdoc mentors to remain a primary mentor, then you can do something where you have 2 co-primary mentors and find a co-primary mentor who is funded. Would be my best suggestion. Do you have any thoughts, Dr. Felder?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar about trying to pull in people, even if it's somebody from a different university. You can emphasize. Another thing that comes up, because sometimes people don't think to do, is to really talk about together. So if your primary mentor isn't R01 funded but has a close collaborative relationship with somebody who is, then you can pull that person in and talk about their long-standing relationships. And if they work well together, even if that person is not directly connected towards you, that could be a way to spin it. Those are things I thought about.
That's a great suggestion. Well, we don't want to go over time too much. Thank you all for your participation. And I think I listed my email is in the questions. If anybody has any questions as you're developing your application, that's the best way to contact me. But thank you, GMaP Region 1 South, for organizing this. And I've enjoyed presenting with you, Dr. Robinson.
I really enjoyed this. It was great material. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Dr. Felder and Dr. Robinson. We appreciate you participating. And so as you see, Dr. Felder's email address is provided here. We'll also be, if you have additional questions, you can submit those to, we sent out an email address for GMaP Region 1 South that you can submit questions to. You also can send them to myself at ricela@musc.edu. And when you have the time, we developed an evaluation just to get a little feedback from those that participated in the webinar today. It's here, listed here on our last slide. If you can take just a few 5 to 7 minutes just to complete that evaluation, that'll be very helpful. We want to know how we can improve our webinars and what other topics you'll be interested in hearing about in future webinars. Thank you so much, everyone that participated. Have a wonderful day.